Ambassador Herman Nickel. And Ambassador Nickel, it's a pleasure to welcome you. Jesse Jackson wants to call South Africa a terrorist state, a renegade state. Well, what does that mean? What will that do in terms of our policies?
Well, certainly it will make it even more difficult than it is even now to deal constructively with the South African crisis. You cannot deal with people whom you yourself regard as beyond the pale of humanity. If you make them feel that, I think you have no basis for any dialogue whatsoever. And they're going to dig in their heels. And as their ambassador to the United Nations, in what I thought was a very unfortunate remark, put it when he told the world to do its damnedest. That is the effect. I mean, there's nobody in the educational field who would recommend the kind of treatment for a young person who has problems as we are now recommending be used against South Africa. It is absolutely the opposite of what we want to achieve. We want to assist in accommodation between whites and blacks in South Africa. We want negotiations that will lead to full participation by the black majority in the central processes of government. What we're doing instead is to polarize the situation still further, where the right wing and white politics is strengthened, because the siege mentality which we are creating plays on the traditional isolationism among Afrikaners vis-à-vis the rest of the world. We are arousing false hopes among blacks who think that we might come to their aid in a revolutionary struggle when we are in no position and are not willing to do that. We are mortgaging the economic future of the most important part of Southern Africa. This is an economy which has to create 300,000 new jobs for young blacks every year if black unemployment is not to spin out of control. If we knock 1 percentage point off that growth rate, they ought to be growing at about 5.5%. They are barely managing 3% now, and they're proud of it. That means that these jobs are not being created. Well, there's going to be 40% unemployment in South Africa without sanctions among blacks, over 40% by the end of the century. With sanctions, it's going to be well over 50%. And what kind of society are we helping to create there? One that is unstable, one that is not the breeding ground for democracy.
Mr. Ambassador, essentially, are you saying that what's happening, Ron Dellums and these others in Congress are posturing in relation to American political interests as opposed to the long-range interests of the blacks in South Africa? Is that about what it amounts to?
It is horrifying to see how this foreign policy issue has become a domestic political football. I'm not impugning anybody's motives, and I'm sure that there are some people who support sanctions in the honest belief that this is the way to bring apartheid to an end. But I think we have to be very careful that we don't indulge our own sense of righteousness, which is not really morality. That is a self-indulgence. And I think that we are seeing now, especially we've seen now on the Democratic Platform Committee, a strange tendency by the Democratic Party to tie the hand of a future president in dealing with a very serious situation and reducing American effective influence to practically nothing.
What should we be doing? Now, the Reagan administration had a policy of what was called constructive engagement. There were enormous reforms in process. Apparently, Congress is ignoring all of them. What should we have as a policy of the United States?
Well, first of all, we ought to be clear about the fact that the future of South Africa is going to be decided by South Africans. And politicians build mousetraps for themselves when they promise that whatever policy they adopt towards South Africa is going to fundamentally change the situation, because it's South Africans that are going to change that situation, not the outside world. But we can be helpful in the effort. Certainly, one of the things that we ought to be interested in is to foster economic growth so that blacks that already have attained enormous economic clout can increase that clout as workers, as consumers, as businessmen. They ought to be given a share in the free enterprise system. And it is nonsense to pretend the way it oddly enough, one hears it from the left, that this economic empowerment has no political consequences. Of course it will have, even if it will not be instant.
Well, Mr. Ambassador, thank you again for being with us here on the 700 Club. We appreciate this so much.
It's a pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, apartheid is repugnant to all of us. I think it would be foolish for any person of goodwill to see a repressive regime continue in this fashion. The question is, how do you change it most effectively? How do you help the blacks in South Africa? And the best way to help them is to make sure they have jobs and that there is a climate where the moderate people, the people of goodwill, white and black, can get together to make out an accommodation which will ultimately result in the kind of a society which we'd like to see. The extreme measures being advocated by Ron Dellums and others will have the effect of plunging that nation either into desperate recession and putting hundreds of thousands of blacks out of work, or possibly bringing about a bloodbath in which maybe millions of people will be slaughtered. No person of intelligence or goodwill would want that, nor would we want the mineral riches of South Africa, which are so vital to the long-range defense of the United States of America, to fall into the hands of leftists and Marxists. And so that the Soviet Union and Marxist government would therefore control as much as 90 to even 100% in certain cases of minerals, which we absolutely need to mount any kind of a credible military effort in the world. We have enormous stake in the future of this country, and we're just not managing our stake very well in the United States Congress. We'll be back with more right after this. Stay tuned.